Hey, it's me, Daniel, again. So, I was able to finally get someone to film me. So, I decided to review two comics today instead of one. One of them is Uncanny X-Men number 159, and the other is Uncanny X-Men Annual number 6. And it's where Dracula fights against the X-Men. So, my first introduction to Dracula was the 1931 Bela Lugosi film. Although I like it, it does have its flaws, such as the fact that Lucy never gets staked in it. The whole premise of her being a vampire is never resolved, and they didn't even follow it up in the sequel Dracula's Daughter. I have since read the original unabridged novel of Dracula. Funnily enough, in the novel, sunlight does not kill Dracula. That was an invention of the films. It also has a premise of Jonathan Harker going to meet Dracula in Transylvania, because in the book, Renfield is just a random patient there in London of Dr. Seward's at his sanitarium. And another big difference is that Van Helsing doesn't even mention vampires until right before they stake Lucy after they've had her funeral. And not only that, but another big difference is that Dracula is vulnerable to communion wafers in the book. So there's that. And also that in the book, they end up going to Transylvania at the end to kill Dracula. And also they put communion wafers into Dracula's coffin so that he can't use them. It's really no wonder with him being vulnerable to communion wafers that they later ended up doing the movie Dracula 2000, where it turns out Dracula is Judas Iscariot, and that he's vulnerable to the cross because it reminds him of what he did to Jesus, and he's also vulnerable to silver because of betraying Jesus for 30 silver pieces. Anyway, back to this comic we're looking at today. Dracula actually first appeared in Suspense number 7, written according to the Wikipedia page I looked at, by Gary Conway, who I mentioned back in my One More Day, One Moment in Time review, and also it was drawn by Gene Coulson. Dracula's first real Marvel series was Tomb of Dracula, which in issue 10 introduced the now popular character Blade. I admit, I could not find much info on why Chris Claremont wanted Dracula in this comic. And now let's dig into Uncanny X-Men number 159 and X-Men Annual number 6 and see how the story of X-Men fighting against Dracula goes.
This cover is very good. It has the X-Men Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Colossus, and Pretty Pride on it, looking a bit scared with the giant head of a female vampire in the background. So the comic starts with the X-Men entering the apartment of a friend of theirs named Misty Knight, who is an African-American detective who is also friends with Luke Cage and Iron Fist. Except they run into her roommate instead. Harmony Young is her name, who is a supermodel there in New York. Kitty is all excited to meet her because she knows of her from the media. I myself could not tell you a single model alive today, except for former model Cindy Crawford, who a lot of you young people have probably never heard of. Anyway, Kitty has a get-together with her parents that she wants Storm to attend. But they are both wearing their X-Men uniforms, so Storm declines. But Harmony offers to give them clothes of hers so that they can both go. So they accept that, and they both end up getting to go to meet Kitty's parents. There is a scene right after this between Cyclops, his brother Alex, and his father Corzar, as well as some other characters, but I'm not wanting to mention it because it's not relevant to the actual story of this comic. But on some other occasion, I do plan to eventually mention the story between Cyclops and his father Corzar. Anyway, back to the comic we're reviewing. Harmony is with Nightcrawler, Wolverine, and Colossus. Nightcrawler is flirting with Harmony. Then we cut to Storm, who somehow got attacked after meeting Kitty's parents and then leaving. Some police have radioed an ambulance after seeing her lying there, and she gets taken by ambulance to the hospital. Wolverine and Colossus come into the hospital later to talk to a doctor named O'Hara. She tells them the police think she was mugged for her money and then had her throat slashed. She thinks it looks bad. But then to the doctor's surprise, Storm is up and walking around. Because she seems well, the doctor goes ahead and lets her leave the hospital after signing some release papers. Then it cuts to Storm lying in bed scared, and it shows her looking really weird. She gets up and uses her powers to create a fog. Then we cut to Wolverine, Colossus, Nightcrawler, and Kitty Pryde. Kitty just arrived home from her parents' house, and they tell her the bad news of how Storm was attacked and might not be doing well. She is, of course, sad at the news. Then in the morning, Kitty goes into Storm's room and opens up the curtains to wake Storm up. Storm does not like the sunlight and asks Kitty to shut the curtains because it hurts her. Yeah, at this point it's pretty obvious Storm was bitten by a vampire. And of course that vampire is Dracula. Kitty starts talking to Storm till Storm tells her to leave her alone. Then in the next scene, Dracula has come in through the window of the X-Mansion to abduct Storm because he wants to make her his bride. Then Kitty comes into the room with a cross and uses it against Dracula, but it has no effect, as Dracula says to her that the cross can only affect him if the person wielding it is a Christian. She is Jewish. According to Google, there was only one time that Dracula was affected by a cross in Tomb of Dracula, but I could not find if the guy who wielded it was a Christian. But he was not able to defeat Dracula because he didn't have enough faith, and Dracula broke the cross he had in half. It's been a while since I read the novel of Dracula, but I am pretty sure most of the protagonists are Christians, including Van Helsing. Then Dracula attacks her by grabbing her by the throat, but it turns out she is wearing a Star of David around her neck, which hurts Dracula. Both he and Storm leave. Then Nightcrawler, Colossus, and Nightcrawler come rushing in, and Kitty tells them what happened. Wolverine says he can try and track Storm, but that it will be hard to do. Then we cut to the X-Men coming up to a large castle in Central Park where Storm and Dracula are. Dracula appears before them and confronts them. He yells at them that their friend Storm is his and that they are now doomed. He sends wolves at them because he has the ability to control wolves and other kinds of dogs in the book. I like this picture here where Wolverine punches his claws into the wolf. It's cool. I also like how Colossus throws the wolf like it is a puppy. That's fun. So then Wolverine asks Colossus to give him a fastball special so he can attack. That is where Colossus throws Wolverine into an enemy. You may have seen that in the third X-Men movie, but my first time seeing it was in the 2003 video game Wolverine's Revenge, which I had on my parents' computer back when it came out. It is a cool thing to see here. Sadly, Dracula fades to fog right away so that Wolverine doesn't hit him. Then Colossus tries to attack Dracula. He fails to do so. Dracula throws him through some trees as if he was just a small rock. Wolverine then tries to attack Dracula, but Nightcrawler points out they cannot beat Dracula in raw strength. So Nightcrawler, who I forgot to say earlier that he was familiar with vampires and their weaknesses, says to Wolverine that they cannot beat Dracula with raw strength, but he knows of other ways to defeat him. He grabs 2 tree limbs from nearby and forms them into a cross. Since he is a Christian, this weakens Dracula. Then Dracula summons lightning and strikes Nightcrawler with it. Thankfully, he teleports to safety. Also, that was not a power of Dracula in the novel. Now Kitty has gotten into Dracula's castle. She finds a new empty coffin. She is relieved as she thinks this means Storm isn't a vampire because of this. Unfortunately, Storm is a vampire and throws Kitty across the room. Kitty ends up pulling out a stake, then drops it saying she won't kill her and will let her kill her instead. Then it cuts to Wolverine, Colossus, and Nightcrawler fighting against Dracula. Wolverine declares that he'll continue fighting against Dracula till something happens. Then Nightcrawler teleports at Dracula again, and Dracula arrogantly asks him if he may be the problem. Then Nightcrawler replies by saying to Dracula, "You have not considered that you might lose." Then Dracula tells Storm to slay her fellow X-Men. At first, it seems like she's going to, but then she betrays Dracula and summons lightning against him. Then Dracula transforms into a giant humanoid bat. I don't recall this being a thing in the novel or movies, but I will go along with it now. Dracula and Storm keep fighting until they go back into his castle. Dracula threatens an innocent woman, but Storm flat out tells him that she will not willingly become his bride, and that she will do everything to fight against him and defeat him, and that she will not ever do what he wants. Surprisingly, Dracula compliments her, saying she has great beauty, courage, and rare strength, and that pursuing her has been his undoing. He turns once again into a humanoid bat creature and flies off, while declaring she and the X-Men will never find him, and that if they meet again, it will be a time and place of his own choosing. Then Storm flies back to the X-Men, who say they are okay. Kitty thinks to herself it is now after sunrise and Storm is not weak. She realizes she is cured. Then Storm and Kitty hug each other. Kitty admits she was scared, and Storm tells her that she was too. She then says the debt she and the other X-Men owe her is beyond anything any single human could ever do. Then they all go back to Harmony's apartment, where there is a phone call for Storm. So the comic ends with Mara McTaggart, who some of you might know from the X-Men 90s cartoon or the prequel movies, who is a former love interest of Charles, that Charles Xavier has taken a turn for the worse and they must come straight to where she is. He actually does get better though at the end of X-Men number 161, where I reviewed a flashback of how Professor Xavier and Charles met. And after that flashback ends, Charles comes out of his coma and is perfectly okay. And anyway, I just didn't want to mention that in that review because I wanted to talk about the flashback. So, on to the next comic. So, this is the cover of X-Men Annual number 6. It just occurs to me though, I have a lot of these characters' annuals, but I have rarely read them. I know some might think that's dumb, but it's hard to know when they took place since the main series rarely ever says the annual is coming out at the end of an issue. Anyway, time to talk about this cover I just mentioned. This cover is good, and it does a good job of drawing the reader in by having Storm as a vampire on it, holding Kitty Pryde, who seems to be dead. If you think she's dead, then I'm going to soon buy some oceanfront property in California from Arnold Schwarzenegger. Anyway, behind Storm and Kitty are all the other X-Men, including Cyclops, who is mostly absent from the last issue. And of course, to the left of the X-Men is Dracula, who has an evil grin on his face. It is a good cover. This comic actually starts off with this teacher named Rachel Van Helsing teaching a class at a college, where a boy in the class asked her if she is related to the stuff Bram Stoker wrote about. But she responds by saying Dracula is a fictional novel and that Abraham Van Helsing is just a fictional character. Then she dismisses the class. One of the other boys in the class makes fun of him for that. While walking home, Rachel Van Helsing thinks about the fact that her family actually did fight Dracula for generations, but that the events of the Dracula novel weren't what happened. But she thinks to herself that she is finally free now that she thinks Dracula is dead. Then she gets home and finds out that Dracula is there. She is terrified. Then we cut to the X-Men, where Kitty is crying and yelling because her parents just got divorced. I will skip the rest of this beginning because I feel it might be too depressing for any viewer whose parents got divorced. So instead I'll skip ahead to where Storm comes into the room and Kitty hugs her. Unfortunately, Storm has become a vampire again. Then she bites Kitty on the neck and throws her across the room. Then we see Kitty on the ground next to a teddy bear and a really creepy looking Jack-in-the-Box. Seriously, it looks like a person. At least the Jack-in-the-Box that was at my great-grandmother's house as a kid looked like a clown. Some might find clowns scary, but I'd rather see a clown than what looks like a tiny man with no arms. Anyway, Kitty has sadly also become a vampire. Storm then goes and bites Colossus and Nightcrawler while they are asleep. Then she transforms into a humanoid bat and flies out the window to go to Dracula. Then there's the silhouette of her and Dracula kissing. So gross. Next scene is Storm waking up naked in her bed sweating. She then puts on a robe and goes to check on Kitty. She seems fine, but of course she isn't. Then she thinks what happened was a dream and flies out the window to go to Dracula as she has lost her will because of him. Kitty then goes through the door to see Colossus. She flirts with him. Then we cut to outside the door. Word is implied Kitty bites Colossus on the neck. Poor Colossus, bitten twice today. Then we cut to Storm flying, and she goes to Dracula's castle and meets Rachel Van Helsing. She offers Storm food. Then Dracula comes into the room and ends up declaring that she is his and that she can do nothing to stop him. Storm tries to summon lightning, but it doesn't hurt him. Then he grabs her by the neck, declaring that she cannot deny the truth of what he says. Then he throws her on the floor, declaring her body and soul are his. Then he threatens her some more and leaves her with Rachel. Then after she and Rachel talk, where Rachel reveals she is a vampire now, Dracula comes back. Storm tells Dracula she will choose to be his if he leaves the X-Men out of it. He then agrees and says he wants a book that will give him the ability to kill other vampires. He orders her to go find it and steal it for him. Then we cut to Storm outside an hour later in the nearby village. Dracula is there with her and tells her to go to the fortress at the top of the hill of the village. He says that he cannot do it himself because it is covered by a lot of holy mystic energy that keeps him from going there. Then Storm goes in and we see Kitty in the form of a vampire. She has stolen the book Dracula wants and runs away with it. Unfortunately, two guards with guns see Storm and she has to jump out a window. But then Dracula, who is in the form of a humanoid bat, again grabs her and declares she has failed him while alive, but that she will serve him in death. Then we cut to Storm in a village with lots of people around her. Then she notices these two pieces of black-colored clothing with a yellow D on them that belong to Dracula. Then she is in the village around a bunch of people and meets her mom. And she talks to her mom for a while. Then her dad comes up and tells her that he must steal something. But then right after he steals this purse that belonged to a woman, a big, huge, giant military jet comes out and blows away her father and mother. Then she wakes up crying out, "Mother!" Dracula is nearby and says that she called him. Then she realizes she is in a coffin. She realizes she has no fangs now and is alive. Dracula tells her she lost a lot of blood, but that it was put to good use, meaning he drank her blood against her will. Storm gets mad and angrily asks while lunging at him, "Will I ever be rid of you?" he backhands her away and says, "No." Then Dracula harasses Storm some more, with Rachel Van Helsing present. She says there are worse fates than becoming a vampire. She brags about how Dracula gives her rapture and power. I'd argue that becoming an evil demonic being that kills people is as bad a fate as you can get. Not that Dracula could possibly understand that ever, since he is wholly evil. Then Dracula pulls Storm's hair and is about to hurt her more when he is hit in the chest by an object. It was thrown by Wolverine, and Cyclops is with him. Cyclops asks Storm if she is okay. Dracula proceeds to insult Cyclops. Nightcrawler then stabs a wooden stick into Dracula's chest. Then Rachel attacks Cyclops. Then we cut to Colossus and Kitty going after Dracula. Then Colossus smashes up one of Dracula's coffins. And we cut to Cyclops, who is now getting attacked by this werewolf who is Rachel. Dracula then goes to the catacombs of his castle, hoping to kill all the X-Men there. Then we cut back to the X-Men, where Kitty decides to use her powers to go through the secret passage Dracula went through. Then Colossus decides to follow her and punches and threatens Wolverine if he tries to stop him. Cyclops shoots his solar beams at the ground to try to get down to the catacombs safely. Then Storm asks Cyclops how they found her. He says the tracking device that was on the Blackbird helped them follow Kitty there, and then after hearing about the theft at the castle, Wolverine was able to use his senses to find her. Then Cyclops tells Storm to stay there, but Storm insists she must fight against Dracula even if it will end her life. She also tells Cyclops that she thinks Colossus and Kitty are influencing each other. Then Cyclops finally gets through, and Cyclops is able to get through the several feet of rock to get to the catacombs. So they all get to the catacombs. Wolverine says he has a scent, and they find Colossus and Dracula fighting. Wolverine then goes to fight Dracula, declaring to him that he has wanted a rematch with him since he last saw him at Central Park. Dracula, though, controls him, makes him pull his claws out, and makes him lunge at Cyclops. Next we cut to Storm fighting against Rachel. Then Storm throws a metal arrow at Rachel, but misses. Then Rachel asks Storm to kill her, but Storm says she can't. Then it cuts to Wolverine fighting Colossus, who is implied to get in front of Cyclops and got him to go elsewhere. Then it cuts to Kitty behind Dracula. Then Kitty reads the spell book she stole earlier to defeat Dracula. It really affects Dracula in a way that he is in pain. But Nightcrawler stops her saying the rest of the spell because he says it will darken her soul. Then Kitty grabs Nightcrawler by the neck, but Storm comes up and tells her to stop. Storm grabs her hand and makes her let go of him. Then Dracula summons his daughter. I gotta comment on his daughter's costume. I sort of like the bat shape on her chest, but I am not a fan of the blue leggings. Just not my taste. She tells Dracula to release Kitty. Then Dracula slaps his daughter for defying him. Suddenly, Dracula is stabbed with a wooden spear. It turns out it was Rachel who did this. Dracula complained she was his body and soul. Rachel then yells at Dracula that he killed everyone she cared about and that she will never be his again. She holds up a golden cross to defeat Dracula. Then Dracula turns into a skeleton because of this. He's dead and loving it. Sorry, couldn't resist making that joke. Rachel says for Dracula to be defeated completely, he must have his head removed from his body. Wolverine declares to do that, but then the whole castle starts crumbling and shaking. The X-Men, Rachel, and Dracula's daughter run for their lives and manage to make it outside. So sadly, Dracula could not be defeated because of this. Also, this scene makes me think of the NES and N64 Castlevania games, where the castle shakes and crumbles to the ground at the end of those games. This came out well before those games. I doubt this was inspiration for those games, but it is a big coincidence. Then again, I have not seen every Dracula film, so it is possible that happened in a movie before this comic came out. It didn't happen, though, in the original Dracula novel. Back to the comic, Rachel asks Wolverine to kill her so that she will no longer be a vampire. Wolverine does so while hugging her. She turns into a skeleton like Dracula did. Her last words are, "Look, the sun. It's so bright, so beautiful." Then Kitty too happily says to remove the stake from Rachel. Then Dracula's daughter introduces herself as Lilith. She says sunlight, garlic, and crosses do not have any effect on her, and that she was created by someone else to destroy her father. She then reveals she mind-controlled Kitty to make her steal the spell book to defeat her father. She says, like Dracula, she could not steal the spell book for the same reasons. Then she also tells them she possessed Cyclops too, but she could not do so for long or possess the rest of them because the X-Men's wills are too strong. She says Nightcrawler stopped her plan to make Kitty her slave and saved Kitty's soul. Then she declares that Storm and Wolverine will be free of Dracula forever and that they shall never see her again. Then Kitty's memory of everything since the beginning of the comic has been erased, and Wolverine finds this out from Storm. Wolverine says that it is good and that it's all over. Storm asks, "Is it?" Then the comic ends with them staring at the sun over the ocean, and it's beautiful artwork. Kudos to the artist, Bill Singowitz. Sorry if I mispronounced that.
These comics are actually pretty good. And while it might seem weird that Chris Claremont had Dracula fight against the X-Men, it is not the first time they've dealt with something or someone supernatural. There is a antagonist of Storm's and the X-Men's called the Shadow King, who's from another dimension, and he's sort of a demonic being. And he always tries to conquer Earth, but the X-Men always thwart him. But it is a good story where good triumphs over evil. Next time, and it will hopefully be out by Halloween, we'll be looking at a scary Captain America comic. See you then.